In the first half of the 20th century, we come to terms with alienation, that is, man's incapability to come to terms with the complexity of the modern world. T.S. Eliot is aware of the impossibility to master a universe dominated by chaos. Therefore, his characters have problems of identity, communication, isolation, and what we can call a loss of commonly accepted values. World War I goes through fast cultural changes. We find the loss of all Victorian values, the Victorian unity, famous Victorian unity, and all the scientific and the philosophical certainties to which man referred. Let us go, then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. This beginning of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock gives us an idea of the changes that take place in poetry and this new sense, this new relationship with the reality. Prufrock himself is built up through images, through different separated images, to tend to highlight this structure of the universe of the time. So built up through images that refer to his inner paralyzed self. Paralyzed because there's no interreaction with the outside world. Life is described, in fact, as a sequence of fragments. Prufrock, in fact, is a disillusioned modern man, and his psychological fragility in the years of the First World War brings out a lonely intellectual figure who is incapable of expressing himself in the ruins of modern culture. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. April, again, as we can find at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, is the month that brings new hope. There is this kind of rebirth of nature. But spring is a sterile land. In a sterile land is a cruel event. It resuscitates memory and desire in a hopeless world. Now, in the wasteland, Eliot gives voice to a sense of alienation and incomprehension through different characters and different situations. From a structural point of view, the poem is written in free verse. There is a high level of experimentation in the choice of the verse form, the length of the lines, the use of the punctuation. Even the language is very much varied. It has different tones, from the solemn to the colloquial. There's no narrative structure, and naturally there is a variety of themes. Now, this structural fragmentation, as we can say, makes Eliot's poem one of the maybe best examples of modern poetry. Now, Europe, after the First World War, is a kind of cultural and spiritual desert. And there's a kind of a juxtaposition between the contemporary world and what we call the classical myths. And one of these, in fact, the myth of the Holy Grail, symbolizes in some way man's spiritual quest for salvation. Now, Eliot, as we see, is a radical innovator in poetry, as is Eliot and Montale, for example. Both of them searched for new means to give voice to the existential anxiety of the 20th century man. They had similar styles and a predilection for the dry and desolate landscapes as emblems, or what we call objective correlatives of the spiritual aridity. Now, the purpose of the objective correlative is to express a character's emotions by showing rather than by describing them, and to create emotion through external factors and evidence. For example, The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot, written in 1925, is a poem of utter emotional and spiritual desolation. If we have a look at the first lines, we get the idea of what we are talking about when he says, "We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw." Now, even the poem Non chiederci la parola, taken from the collection of Ossi di Seppia by Eliot and Montale, goes through this general characteristic. And even this was written in 1925. And from the title Ossi di Seppia, we tend to have a look directly to what we intend with the objective correlative, what is shown. The idea of these ossi di seppia gives already the idea of this barren and sterile world. Now, Eliot and Montale testified a common sensibility. They explored the fragmented 20th century world. Both had a tragic vision of their age as a barren and a dry wilderness. Also, their methods were quite similar. They believed poetry should be quite impersonal and used the technique of the objective correlative to transform private experience into objective forms, awakening an emotional response in the reader. Actually, if we go back to T.S. Eliot's readings and influences, we should surely refer to, for example, Ezra Pound, and the Imagists. Ezra Pound, we should remember, had a certain experience with the Oriental world of the images, okay, even in the writing, and how they tended to produce and reflect a reality. So the Imagists, in which we find no decorative language, and it is replaced by a clear, precise image. Even the French symbolists, in some way, use a free verse where T.S. Eliot goes back to, and draw images, reflect images from everyday life. Not to speak about John Donne, for example, and the metaphysical poets, where the use of wit and a striking association of images is very important in the creation of the rhythm and the description of the reality of the time. Dante Alighieri for T.S. Eliot is a model to imitate and to refer to. Dante is a model of all poetic art for him, and where there is a complete width of an emotional range, and follows him in his spiritual journey from the despair of the Inferno to the beatific vision of Il Paradiso. In some way, we can follow this journey in Prufrock's writing from Prufrock and other observations to the last and most important work after his changes, as we can call it, from a religious point of view to the four quartets, Prufrock to the four quartets. So we can say from the aridity and squalor of the society of the time to a new, a mystical view of man seen in the light of eternity. In fact, we can say that there is this important conversion in T.S. Eliot in 1927. He returns to religion in some way, finds answers in this new aspect to the problems, to his vision of the world. The turning point maybe should be the publishing of Ash Wednesday in 1929, where we already find this new mood, this new attitude to life, if you want. And it is out of the desert of doubt that had characterized his precedent poetry. We go into the garden of the spiritual life. Now, this new religious belief finds its most mature and complete expression, as we have said, in the four quartets. We know that it is made up of four poems. It is a whole work unified surely by structure and themes. Even the title, the four quartets, has something of musical in the structure and how it is organized. In fact, each quartet is structured musically. In fact, the musicality of the lines are important regarding the metrical and the verse forms. It is we can call it a remarkable, complex work, where we find the main theme, that is time and eternity. And we find this new image. It conveys a mystical view of life. In other words, according to T.S. Eliot, man must look beyond the life. He must look to eternity, which can be done only by putting apart all the earthly attitudes. Man must leave behind all what characterizes his earthly or beings, as we can say. He's referring to the concrete, realistic world, to go beyond it and find new referring points, new attitudes, new beliefs, and new referring points in the spiritual life.